Nowadays, it's not unusual in itself to have a county school's orchestra, but I can imagine that when it was founded, it was something a little bit out of the ordinary.
Uh, it was unique. The County School of Music started in 1948, and in those days no other authority had ever thought of building a school's orchestra. We indeed anticipated the National Youth Orchestra. So in 1948, when we started, and remember in those days it was impossible to buy new instruments, new orchestral instruments, so everything we had, or everything we acquired from the junk shops, and they were very poor instruments, and obviously we played very badly. But nevertheless, in those days, we were the original of all that's happened since.
How on earth did you go about starting a county orchestra? Did you go around all the schools and have a listen?
No, I was the first music advisor to be appointed after the war, and it soon became evident to me that the bulk of my work was to help the very inadequate teachers of music in the schools, which meant that I was going to spend my life talking music at a very low level, so that I saw that for my own benefit I had to do something which would give me an urge. And secondly, music as it was before the war really was the singing lesson, and that had been outdated long ago. So I decided that music should be taught through instruments. So I had two visions. One was to build up for myself something which I would enjoy doing, and the second, that by so doing I would promote an instrumental way of learning music.
We hear that Leicestershire is progressive in a number of ways. Do you think it was progressive in appointing you as a music advisor just after the war?
I think it was different. I suppose I came into that by accident, because immediately after the war I came to Leicestershire because having served the whole of my time doing music, funnily enough, throughout the war and conducting bands and orchestras, and having been a music master in Nottingham before the war, it struck me that I must start again, and I mustn't do once more all that I'd done before the war. So that I saw that there was a vacancy in Melton Mowbray, and I rang up the headmaster and went to see him. And I quite honestly believe that I got that job because I'm rather good at games, and he was very anxious to do games well at his school, and I was very anxious to play games too. So that by accident I came to Leicestershire, and after I'd been there for a year, the new director of education, who at that time hadn't been appointed but was an HMI, came to my school to look at the music. And I think one of my other interests is that I paint quite a little, and he was terribly interested in painting, so that I'm not sure that I didn't become the music advisor because I can paint. So by accident I'm a music advisor, I suspect.
And that was all through Stuart Mason then?
That was through the one and only Stuart Mason.
You obviously have a very high regard for him.
Well, I suppose he had more hours with me than he ever had with anybody else, but certainly he provided the impotence, and he provided the means for me to do all that's been done. Yes. Nowadays,
the Saturday rehearsal is an integral part of the County School of Music. How did that first come about?
A Saturday rehearsal is the County School of Music. Without it, there is no County School of Music. It's important that I get the best musicians together, and indeed when we first started, I chose 7 schools in different parts of the county where I myself went and taught them to play the instruments. And at the end of the war I felt that I could play well enough on most of the instruments of the orchestra. So I spent my time teaching in 7 schools. And quite obviously I could magnetize the children to play a new instrument for a short period, but after that it becomes hard work, so I had got to do something to vitalize them. So I brought them in every Saturday to join together and to play as an orchestra, and of course they played very badly, and it was my job then to make sure that they could play to other people, because it's your conceit that makes you anxious to get better and better. So I used to take them to the far-flung parts of the county. First concert I remember was in Church Langton, which in those days was just a little hamlet in the south-east of Leicestershire. And there we did a concert, so-called, and we had a bumper tea, and the headmaster told us how good we were, and that convinced us that we should go on to the next one. So it grew and grew as the years passed by.
Well, making records came a lot later, but I'm going to jump the gun a little bit by asking you to select the first piece of music played by the County School's Orchestra from one of the records and tell me a little bit about it, please.
Well, obviously we've gone a long way further now, and it occurred to me that if ever we were to do anything that was to show us to advantage, we had to be unique in that direction. Obviously, for me to ask anybody to hear us play and to play the music that the great orchestras play, well, we would be at a tremendous disadvantage. So the time occurred when we'd had a number of pieces written for us, and that was the time that I could persuade Pi, the recording people, that they should make a record of music specially written for the County School of Music. Now, the piece that I will suggest to you wasn't written for the County School of Music, but it was written by a man who became identified with us very many years ago, and by his exuberance and his vitality gave us another urge, and that was Malcolm Arnold. And he came to conduct us, and at that time he'd written a piece which had never been played and certainly hadn't been published. And so he lent it to us, and we played this piece. It's a divertimento for orchestra, which is a typical Malcolm Arnold piece of music, a great piece of music. And since he was a wonderful trumpet player, you will hear lots of wind noises.
That's Malcolm Arnold's Divertimento for Orchestra. You seem to me, I don't know if this is a fair question, to have had a number of lucky breaks over the years, and perhaps being associated with people like Malcolm Arnold, and of course Michael Tippett has also been another example of that.
You say lucky breaks. Lucky breaks are those which you yourself make. I believe that one grasps the opportunity, and if you don't, then the opportunity doesn't occur again. Certainly, when we thought we were good enough, we asked people to come and conduct us, and so to that extent, when Malcolm Arnold came, that was a lucky break. But Sir Michael Tippett was another thing. As we got better and better, so I knew I had to stretch the orchestra further and further, and that I had to do other things and things which no one else had attempted. And the time came when I knew that we needed a patron. And my first thoughts were Sir Michael Tippett. And I wrote to him to see if I could come and talk to him about this. And he said, although he was interested and indeed had heard about us, which was very flattering, he said that he didn't think he could come up to Leicestershire to conduct. Indeed, my first thought was to ask him to conduct the orchestra before I asked him to become the patron. So he said he hadn't the time to come up. So I rang him up there and then and said if he hadn't time to come up, then we'd come to him. So I went down to Corsham, which is a village in Wiltshire where he lives. I saw him, and then I went on to the local school and borrowed it from them, which they were very pleased to do, and very nicely about all this. And we took the whole orchestra, stayed a week in the school, worked with Sir Michael. He came up every day, and that's how he became part of us.
This stretching the orchestra to the limit, has it always been an important thing, do you think, to keep them doing something new?
I think it's the most important thing of all. I think when you have a young orchestra, you try to give the challenge which that they may not be capable of, because young people thrive on challenge. I think the greatest thing that happens to us, and it doesn't happen nearly enough in my opinion with other county orchestras, is that we make ours a school orchestra. And when a child leaves school, and it's now in September, so this very week some 25 of them will be leaving us, but we'll be playing another concert within the next month with the newly constituted orchestra. And that's made possible by the fact that we have 5 orchestras ranging from the under-12s through to the under-15s and so on until we get to the senior orchestra. Now, the very fact that when a child leaves school, he leaves the orchestra, means there's always the next one looking to the place that he's going to occupy. And I am, during the previous year, talking to that person about the possibilities, and so he's having to rise to the challenge. If we had a youth orchestra in which everybody could remain in their place for years and years, we would have tremendous frustration amongst younger members.
I think now we'll stop and hear a second piece of music. What would you suggest we hear this time?
Well, it's most appropriate now, surely, because we've talked to Sir Michael. Years ago, after Sir Michael had become our patron, he said he must write a piece for us. And the piece gradually began to assemble. It's now a suite. It's called the Shire Suite, which is accepted as one of his real pieces of music and has been played on the proms. But in its original conception, he wrote the first and last movements, first one being built around Summer Is A-Comin' In. And the piece that I would like you to hear, though, is the 5th part of this suite, which is written around the non nobis domine of William Byrd. And this is most appropriate, and Sir Michael realised that, because over all the years, whenever we've been away, and we've been having meals, we've always sung our own grace, and the grace we've always done has been non nobis domine.
You have, of course, as an orchestra, gone abroad on a number of occasions, but I gather you also take the orchestra away to rehearse in this country. Could you tell me a little bit about both of those things?
Yes, this again is another of the things which stretch the orchestra. In the early days, Saturday morning rehearsals was enough. But as we became better, and as an inducement to them to keep coming on Saturday morning and keep working hard, I decided we should take them away. And as soon as you decide you must do something, then you have to find just how you can do it. So I decided that the seaside was the obvious place to them, and that summer was the right time to take them. So I thought of which area we should go to, and came to the conclusion that Cromer would suit my purpose best of all. And I went down, saw the one of the directors of education, one of the deputy directors of education there, suggested the project to him, and we were allowed to go into a school. And in borrowing the school, I then had to take camp beds, which we hired, borrowed, and begged from different parts of Leicestershire. We had to convince the local feeding staff that they would come in and feed us. Well, that started many, many years ago, and it's been happening ever since. Nowadays, we take the senior orchestra away every Easter time. Last year, we were at Brighton making another record. This next year, all being well, we should be going down to Hereford, where I hope we're doing some concerts. But at midsummer now, we take the intermediate orchestra away, and then we take the orchestra below that away. This is part of our development. As to going abroad, that came after these seaside trips, and it was when I thought we needed another challenge that I went along to the Director of Education, Stuart Mason, and suggested to him that a new challenge to us would be if we went overseas. Well, I like a challenge, but he was always one for giving me one, and giving me one probably more than I'd ever expected. So having said this to him, nothing more was said until some 2 or 3 weeks later, when he sent for me and said, "Look, I've arranged that trip for you." He had been in the intervening time to Germany, and he'd called in on Essen and suggested to them that they bring an orchestra to us and that we in return go back and play for them, which was fine, except that when the Essen orchestra came to us, which they did some few weeks before we went to them, I found that they were a much older group of students of anything up to 25 years of age, who played superbly. They came and lived in Birstall. They played concerts around the town, around the county, and their playing was such as to leave me with dismay and wonder what was going to happen when we went to Germany. Quite obviously they played much better than we were likely to, but it was the next stimulant, because having heard them play, the orchestra knew they had to be so much better. So we were always grateful to Essen for starting us off.
Could you tell me a little bit now about the records, because you have 4 out at the moment, isn't it, and another one in the pipeline?
Yes, well, the first one I've mentioned to you because we had a reason for suggesting a record of pieces that had been written for us. That was the first. The second, again, was a lucky accident that we took advantage of. The ITV were making programs for children about music in different ways, and they had a piece of music written which was a fairy story. Well, it was probably a thriller rather than a fairy story, which the words had been written by Robin Ray and the music by Herbert Chappell, and they wanted an orchestra to do this for a children's program, and they asked us to do it, which we did. The program, the music was such an obvious piece to be played for as a children's record that we talked around this, but realized we had nothing to put on the other side. So I got in touch with a poet that I knew, and we talked with Herbert Chappell again. We then came up with the idea of George and the Dragonfly, which was a smashing title for a children's work. Then it was very easy from there on to persuade Argo to make this into a children's record. So that was the second record. The third record, again, by opportunity, Andre Previn arrived in England and in giving a talk to the radio said, very much with his tongue in his cheek, I think, that one of the reasons he wished to come to Britain was in order to conduct a youth orchestra, and he named the youth orchestra as the Leicestershire one. So that gave me the opportunity to ring him up and say, well, why don't you come and conduct this orchestra? And he did say, well, of course I will. But it didn't happen like that because he was so busy that I then said to him, look, we're making another record. It had been suggested to us, by the way, that if we had any more inspirations, the Argo people would like to make another record. Well, here was the opportunity. So I said to Andre Previn, what would you like to conduct for us on a record? And he decided on the piece, which is an elegy, which I will suggest you play in a moment, by John Ireland, which is very little known, but which is one of the loveliest pieces in music. Perhaps we could hear that now.
That's John Ireland's Elegy, played by the County School's Orchestra and conducted by Andre Previn, and that formed part of the third record.
That formed part of the third record. The other pieces, again, so that our record would be special, I asked Sir Arthur Bliss, who had got to know us by now, if he would conduct a piece of his own, which we had played to him earlier on, and which he'd said how much he liked our playing of. Obviously, I was asking Sir Michael to conduct the suite that he'd written for us, and with Andre Previn and myself conducting a further item, this made up the programme.
And that was the third LP. There's been one since then, hasn't
The fourth one, yes. Again, this came by these opportunities. Somewhere in London, a group of highly important musicians had decided that the music of Havergal Brian, which had been terribly neglected. Here was a man now in his 96th birthday who had written 32 symphonies, 20 of them since he was 80 years of age, none of them which had ever been put on record, and only one of them which had ever been played by the radio. And so before he died, these people thought that some of his music should be put on record. And what better, they thought, than that it should be played by a young orchestra. And happily for us, what better, they thought, than that the Leicestershire School's Orchestra should play it. So the music was sent to me of two of his symphonies, and we were asked if we would play it. It was rather a forbidding task, because the music of Havergal Brian is not easy by any means. He is, I think you could describe him as an anti-romantic, in that never will he allow his music to become sentimental or suspect. And so it is always hard, drive, imaginative, but imaginative in a very dour way. Anyway, we set out to play his two symphonies, and we made the record last year, and funnily enough, or happily enough, the record was voted one of the 6 best of the year, which stimulated a very famous company to be interested in us making a fifth record, which we've just completed, and which we hope will be issued later this year. The recording company are CBS, and we've made further pieces of Havergal Brian for the record.
Looking back now in 1974, doesn't it seem a bit like a fairy story come true?
Yes, life's a fairy story if you make it so, isn't it? I've enjoyed it, and if I've worked hard, and a lot of people tell me I work hard, but I never think so, because I enjoy every moment of this work.
Stuart Mason, of course, has retired now as Director of Education for Leicestershire, and one day you'll have to leave the orchestras. So what sort of things do you see for the future of the orchestra?
More and more success, because we'll never thrive without it, of course. I think we're ideally placed in Leicestershire. The new Director of Education is tremendously interested in music and is an extremely good musician, so we can but suppose that we're going to be better and better as the years go by. And I hope that even when I'm gone, that I will be taking a great deal of interest in them, and that I can stimulate in some way. But I haven't gone yet, and there are many more things that I hope to do. One thing that I find tremendously stimulating at the moment is that I have discovered, and I haven't discovered it, but I have discovered for myself, a group of ballet dancers who I think are superb, and we're working with them, and I hope we're going to work more and more, and I hope that a new dimension is going to take place in Leicestershire. The thing that hasn't happened to us yet, and which will happen, is that we haven't played yet for one of the proms. That probably won't come in my time, but it'll come.
You're confident about that?
I'm confident this orchestra is unique.
Now, of course, it's no longer the Leicestershire County School's Orchestra, is it?
Well, Leicestershire now is bigger than Leicestershire. It's the city and it's the county. The city have got very good orchestral development, so that when the two of us come together, surely we can only suppose and make sure that we're better even than we are now.
Do you think in some ways that you've become the county school's orchestra and the county school's orchestra has become you?
I think that the spirit of me will always be part of the County School of Music. I hope so, indeed.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much now for talking to us. Could we have one final piece of music from the orchestra?
Well, yes, we'll be now anti-romantic, because all that I've been talking is romance and the romantic part of my life. So let's have some of the music of Havergal Brian, the musician unknown to the majority of Britain, but nevertheless a great composer who was probably obscured by Elgar and Vaughan Williams, and had they not lived, then the name of Havergal Brian would have been much more universal. As it is, we are the first to put his music on record, and here is part of his 21st Symphony.